Welcome back to Bexhill West. I'm James. Thank you for joining me. So in today's video we're going to focus on ballast wagons. And the reason is I've got lots of freshly laid track at Bexhill West that needs to be ballasted, and I thought when that video comes to be being made it would be nice to have an appropriate set of ballast wagons, make a little ballast train up, and possibly it can be animated and be made a little bit of fun. Now, I'm quite lucky in that I have a particularly nerdy hobby within a hobby within a hobby, and that is I'm sort of rather enamoured by this book and all the wonderful drawings in it. And over the past couple of years I've been sort of redrawing I should say, all of the diagrams and stuff in here, and so I've got quite a wide collection of 3D models of suitable rolling stock. So I've got a variety of sort of engineers' wagons that I could be using, but the ones I want to use for my video, because they're sort of my favourite and they're technically a little bit challenging, it's going to be these. Who doesn't like a little four-wheel ballast hopper? Now seven of these were built in 1911 by the Leeds Forge company, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later because it's got a bit of interesting history relating to those. But anyway, that's the design we're going to go with. So this is pretty much a one-piece 3D print. I've added a few little etched brass details to it. Now this was my very first one straight out the printer. And I didn't even, to be honest, I didn't even wash it before I threw a bit of paint over it and saw how it's going to look. Anyway, it's got me thinking that there's possibly some potential to this. So the purpose of today's video is to have a go at making a rake of these things and potentially an appropriate brake van to tow along behind them. Now, I think this video will be split into two parts. Today I'll get the basic construction work done, and then next time we'll have a few details added to it. Anyway, let's crack on. Now, I mentioned at the start that this was my first sort of one off the production line, as it were, and that's not strictly true. I've made several of these in the past. When I originally drew them, I drew everything exactly to scale, and I found that the sides warped and details didn't quite reproduce. So on this one I've actually beefed certain elements up so that they reliably print well, and that's fine. Now I mentioned that this one hadn't had any work done to it in terms of preparation. Now that's not strictly true. I did get it out of the printer and I went to just blow a bit of paint over it, but I did on one of the panels, which hopefully you can see just here. I did give that a quick rub over with some wet and dry paper, literally very quick, just to see how it looked, and it does look better. Now here's a little experiment. I've got my jeweler's loop here and I'm going to try something. I don't know if this is going to work. If I hold that up there, I don't know whether this is going to focus, perhaps somewhere around there. Difficult with the light, but hopefully you can sort of see some of the detail and some of the layer lines that the 3D printing process inevitably creates. Now this isn't bad, and this was printed with 50 micron layer lines. No doubt if I printed this again at 30 microns it would be even better. The reality is that as I sit here looking at this thing looks pretty good, but if I zoom in or take a photo and have a look at it up close, the layer lines are discernible. So what I'm going to do is rub these things down just briefly. I don't want to get rid of all of that texture. I think that texture could be helpful when it comes to painting and weathering these things. So I want to leave some texture, but I definitely want to clean up the layer lines a little bit. Now the reason I blew some paint on here is because if we take an unpainted one, let's take this one here for example, you can't really see the detail on them. On the bare 3D print it's sort of very difficult to pick up on. For example, I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but as I'm looking at this I can't see the line of rivet detail along the bottom here. There's also some other little details, little bosses just on the end here, which are going to take a brass handrail, such as that one. Anyway, so I'm going to clean these up with some wet and dry paper, and to do which I'm going to use some little clothes pegs like this. Now I think these things make great little tools, and what I do is I just glue a bit of wet and dry paper to the end of them, and they make great little sanding sticks. I've got one here I've drilled holes in as a sort of a handrail bending jig. We'll look at that in a minute, but anyway, I'm going to crack on and just give these things a gentle sanding just to try and improve the surface finish a little bit. Now then, whilst all that's going on, let's mention this gentleman, Samson Fox. Now, he was born in Bradford, the West Riding of Yorkshire, in July of 1838, to the son of Jonas Fox, who was a mill worker, so quite humble beginnings. Now, Samuel Fox started work at the age of 8, would you believe, in a textile mill. And at 15, he became apprentice in a tool making and foundry company. And later on in his late 20s, he would set up his own tool making business called the Silver Cross Works. Anyway, 10 years later in 1874 he set up the Leeds Forge Company. Now the first of his products that were really quite successful were corrugated boiler flues. Now they were really successful, and I guess that's where he made his money. But his experience in pressing and forming steel led to all sorts of other innovations, particularly with railway rolling stock. Now some of you watching this might be familiar with Fox bogies, and it was Samson Fox and his Leeds Forge Company that were responsible for developing those. So come the turn of the 20th century, the Leeds Forge Company was well established and respected, producing railway vehicles which were exported all around the world. And here we can see one of his early attempts at producing a discharging hopper wagon. Now this was for a South African, I believe a narrow gauge railway, and you could see the opening doors in the bottom of the vehicle. Now these were great, but of course they only discharged the ballast between the tracks. This basic idea was later developed, and in 1910 we can see here the wagon that's produced for the Buenos Aires Western Railway, which is a 5'6" gauge railway, obviously in South America. Now they built 50 of these particular wagons, and we can see from the drawing here that this differs significantly from that previous South African one, in as much as the discharge sort of chutes will now discharge the material between the tracks and to either side of it. Now it was a development of this concept which led to the Leeds Forge Company producing 7 of the wagons such as we're looking at today for the South Eastern and Chatham Railway. So obviously much smaller, 4-wheeled, 20-ton vehicles, but with exactly the same operating principle, in that the ballast can be discharged between the tracks and to either side through the sort of self-discharging outlets. So I've given the basic wagon shell a quick clean up. I'll probably do a little bit more on this, but that's just sort of got the job going. The next thing I want to do is drill some tiny holes to take some 0.3mm brass wire for various things like the shafts that these hand wheels will sit on, the little hand rail there, and some little loops here. I think they might be horse loops, although I'm not sure horses were still being used for shunting in 1914. But anyway, we've got some little holes to drill. And as is always the way when you go to make a video, I have managed to snap my last 0.3mm drill, which is quite frustrating. However, there is still a tiny little bit left. Fortunately, when you're drilling stuff like this, it doesn't need to be precision sharpened. That will probably be enough to start the holes off, and then I've got a little trick that we can use to extend those holes in just a minute. So let's whack that in the drill. Now, I get asked about my drill all the time. People see it in the background of the videos and send me emails about it. It's a Fordham jeweler's drill, and it's really nice. Got a little handpiece there, a bit like a Dremel, but it's got a flexible shaft. The motor is hanging up to the right hand side of me as I sit here, and what's really convenient about it is it's controlled with a foot pedal, so I can just press my feet down and turn that on and off, which is quite handy. So I can have one hand on the drill, the other hand on the workpiece. So let's try and find some of these holes. The problem with this is my eyesight. Let me try and get somewhere where I can see what I'm doing, and the camera can hopefully see what I'm doing. Okay, this is a bit of a compromise. Perhaps something like that. So I'm going to just drill away. So I've got the next one. My eyes tell me that's okay, but no doubt if I take a photo of this and zoom in later, these holes will be all over the place. But anyway, let's carry on. Now then, I could of course drill these by hand, but I find that having a sort of a powered drill, particularly with very, very fine drill bits, they tend to, ironically, last a bit longer. But there you go, I dropped this one. I don't normally drop them. So we've got a few little holes to do on here. Some nice little sort of pillow bearings here to take the cross shafts. So let's start those off. Do another one. Okay, let's see how we're doing. That's okay, I managed to destroy that one a little bit. That's the downside to using a broken drill. That'll be fine. Good, just a couple more to go. I'm going to get my loop out and just see what I'm doing first. Right, so I had to mark out the two holes here with a pen because I just really can't see them. So let's have a little go at those. Okay, so that's fine, but these holes I've not drilled all the way through because my broken drill bit isn't long enough, which is so frustrating. So what I'm going to do is replace that, and I'm just going to finish those holes off by drilling them with a little bit of wire. Now this works brilliantly for tiny little diameter holes like this. Got a little piece of wire here. The challenge is getting the little piece of wire into the chuck of the tool, and have it running on centre. Now I'll expect it will wobble a little bit. As you can see that it's definitely wobbling, and what I tend to do is use my finger to stabilise it. Now the great thing about using a piece of wire is you can actually sort of drill round corners if you just gently press on it, so sometimes that's handy. Anyway, let's see how we get on. Hopefully that wire will find the holes that I've drilled previously. Okay, so this pillow bearing here, which takes a cross shaft, I'll get the other one out, hopefully you can see on here, there's a cross shaft that runs between these hand wheels, and there's a pillow bearing, and these steel supports in the middle also need to be drilled, and that's where using a piece of wire as a drill could be quite handy, because that will extend through, and if it doesn't quite extend through, we can make the bit of wire longer. Now the longer we make the bit of wire, the more it's going to flap around and need a bit of controlling. So if I turn that on now, we'll probably see quite a wobble on the end of it. But not to worry, I can steady that with my fingertip and it'll be just fine. So let's drill through there. Now I'm not sure if the camera's going to get this, but I'm going to pick up the centre of that next bearing. There we go, we now drill through both of those, and that's going to support that piece of wire to enable me to drill through that next piece, which is the sort of support bracket. Now what I find when you use a piece of wire like this, I think it's not really drilling, it's as much as anything, it's kind of heating up and melting its way through. So sometimes these holes close up again. So I usually run through again at a slightly slower speed just to clear them out. There we go. Not bad. Now I'm going to try, this is an experiment, this will probably go wrong. I'm going to try drilling this one from the other side without pilot drilling it. Let's see if the wire will just do the whole job for me. Perfect. So I can continue that through. Let's turn this round so hopefully you can see what's going on. I'm going to try drilling through into that second central support there. Something like that. And again, I'm going to come through nice and slow. Right, those holes should be pretty cleaned out now. And as a little test, I've got some brass wire here, which I don't seem to be able to pick up. There we go. Let's see if that's going to fit. Right, that will do. Let's get my tweezers. There we go. So we've got 3 of these cross shafts on this end and a single one at this end. So these 3 cross shafts and their hand wheels control the 3 discharge gates. So there's one in the base and one on each side. So you could run along and divert the ballast out wherever you wanted it. One on the other end, as I say, is the handbrake. Okay, I'm going to drill some more holes and then we'll make up some brass bits and pieces for this. So the next item on the agenda is to make these little handrails and little grab handle things out of some fine brass wire. So if I zoom in, let's try and focus in a bit closer, something like that. So you can see we've got them just here and here and here. And for that I'm using my modified miniature clothes peg that I showed you earlier. Of course this could be any old bit of scrap. I quite like these because they're made of quite hard wood, so they sort of do the job nicely. Now then, what I've done is I've just used my vernier caliper to pick up the hole centres for the various bits that I want to make, and then I've jabbed those into the end of that little clothes peg, and you can see I've drilled 2 holes. So that smaller gap just there will form the wire handrail or grab handle just here, and then there's a second hole with a wider offset, and that one will form that little grab handle there. So to make these little handrails or grab handles, I'm just simply going to stick my piece of wire, in fact no I won't, I'm going to form my first bend with my pliers. So I'm going to get that at sort of 90 degrees, something like that. We could tweak this afterwards. Then drop it in through that little hole, something like that. And put the second bend in. Try and get that nice and tight. There we go, something like that. I don't mind it sprung open a little bit, it will force together when it goes into the holes on the wagon. So let's trim this up slightly. I'll trim this a little bit more in just a moment once I've got it fitted, but that will do for now. And now we're into the fiddly task of fitting that into the holes that I'd previously drilled. Something like that. We can tweak that a little bit. And I'll secure that eventually with a bit of super glue. So I'll very quickly whiz round and make some more and get these little handrails on here as well. Next up, we're going to solder one of these little hand wheels onto the end of one of the brass cross shafts, and to do that I'm again using one of these little wooden pegs. I bought loads of these in the pound shop for £1, funnily enough, and I find them really useful. Of course you could use any old scrap of wood for this, but I find the springs are quite handy as well for different things. But anyway, what I've done is I've cut a slot down the end of it with a razor saw. I've pushed the piece of wire through the slot and I've just pinched it in my little vise here, and that's holding that. So hopefully when I drop this hand wheel on, it's going to sit on the face of that little wooden peg and it'd sit nice and square whilst I solder it. So let's see if this will fit first. Oh, marvellous, it has. Right, so that's pretty good. Now I've gripped this with, it's fairly tight, but I can slide it, that piece of brass, a little bit, so I'm just going to adjust that so it's sticking up ever so slightly. Something like that should do. And now I'm going to embarrass myself by making a mess of soldering that onto there. Something like that. That will do, and there we go. You can see how that wire was held. So that's one end done. So I'll put a hand wheel on one end of each of those cross shafts. Now these little hand wheels are actually the wrong pattern. They're designed, hopefully you can make out, there's a little bit there where you could sort of solder another pin in to make a sort of a handle that you might grip and wind round, but they're all I've got. They're actually an etch from Wizard Models. There we go. Came with a whole selection of them, sadly not the right ones, so I will etch some nice little 6-spoke hand wheels for these, but you know, that's a job for another day. Let's get these done first. So here we are then, that's with the little hand wheels fitted. You can see the little cross shafts in there. We've got our little hooks and handrails and stuff on. It's all looking quite nice. Now this is still a little bit rough and ready. It's got to be painted. That will be the next stage. And of course need to have some wheels on and the couplings. Now the next video we'll deal with some more of the detailing. For example, there is a vacuum brake cylinder which needs to sit on the end between these stanchions, and a vacuum brake pipe which will run down the side here. So that will all be done once I've given this a basic coat of paint. So for now, that's where we're at. So I've almost got 2, just need 5 more to go. Now a fun thing with this that I hadn't really anticipated when I started printing them was that it is possible to read the number plate on the side. So I'm going to make sure that my rake of 7 all have the correct numbers on. So then I think that's a pretty good point at which to leave this. I've got this to a point where it's more or less looking as it should. This won't take me long now to do the final bits and pieces and have it finished off, but of course before I can finish it I've got to get another 6 to match. So that will all be coming out in part 2, but in order to, I've got a little bit of time in which to do it. Part 2 of this wagon won't be the next video on the channel. No, the next video on the channel is going to be about this. Now this is a one-piece 3D print for a Midland Clayton coach, and I get lots of questions emailed to me and stuff saying would I make a video about how I create the 3D models. Well, it's a bit of a big subject. Where do you start? So what I've done is I've put it all into one video. It's going to be a long one, it's about an hour long, and it runs through what I do from working from a 2-dimensional drawing and my approaches to sort of building it up into a 3D model. So hopefully that'll be of interest to some people, but an hour long it probably won't be for everyone. In fact, I've sort of bored myself a little bit with the editing, but that will be the next video on the channel. Now, as a bit of a heads up, the video immediately after that will be another laser review, I'm afraid. This time it's a brand new machine that's come out, and it's quite exciting. I'm sort of bound by a confidentiality agreement at the moment, so I can't say anything about it, but stick around because that will be, I think, of interest if laser cutting and laser machines are something which interests you. Anyway, thereafter we will return to this. We'll get these finished off, and we'll do the little brake van to match them. We'll have ourselves a nice little train. Anyway, until then, thank you very much indeed for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.